You don't need a telescope or a rocket to see an alien landscape. Some of the strangest terrain in the solar system is sitting right here in the United States, hiding behind a state highway sign instead of a NASA mission patch. Boiling rainbow water, rocks that move by themselves, sand dunes that shouldn't exist.
Hey guys, you're watching Placeologist, and these are the 17 places in America that seem like they're from another planet. Let's get into it.
Number 17, Chiricahua National Monument, Arizona. Tucked into the Sky Islands of southeastern Arizona, Chiricahua National Monument is a forest of stone columns so dense and strange that early visitors nicknamed it the Wonderland of Rocks. Thousands of tall, narrow rhyolite spires rise out of the mountainside, some balanced so precariously on their bases that they look like they'd topple over if someone leaned on them the wrong way. The whole formation traces back to a single, catastrophic volcanic eruption roughly 27 million years ago, when a nearby volcano collapsed and buried the region under a thick layer of hot ash. That ash eventually cooled and hardened into rhyolite, and over millions of years, wind, water, and freeze-thaw cycles carved cracks in the rock into narrow columns, slowly whittling the landscape into the maze of pinnacles standing there today. The Chiricahua Apache, for whom the mountains are named, knew this terrain intimately, and Apache leader Cochise reportedly used the rugged landscape as a stronghold during years of conflict with the U.S. Army in the 1860s and 70s. Today, hiking trails wind directly through the columns, letting visitors walk between rock spires that look less like Arizona and more like the surface of a planet with a very different geological history. The park's elevation ranges dramatically, from low desert grassland up to cool, pine-covered mountain peaks, which lets an unusually wide mix of plant and animal species overlap in one relatively small area. Because the Sky Islands of southeastern Arizona sit at a crossroads between the Rocky Mountains, the Sierra Madre, and the Sonoran Desert, Chiricahua hosts species found almost nowhere else in the country side by side, including several types of hummingbirds that migrate up from Mexico specifically to nest among the pinnacles each summer. Number 16, Devil's Tower, Wyoming. Rising nearly 900 feet straight up out of the surrounding Wyoming grassland, Devil's Tower looks like something that doesn't belong on Earth. A single ribbed monolith of gray rock with almost perfectly vertical sides. It became the country's first national monument in 1906, designated by President Theodore Roosevelt under the brand new Antiquities Act, a full 66 years before Congress created the modern National Park Service. Geologists generally agree the tower formed when magma pushed up through sedimentary rock layers and cooled underground, though there's some debate over the exact mechanism. As the molten rock slowly cooled, it contracted and cracked into the distinctive hexagonal columns visible today, and over millions of years, erosion stripped away the softer surrounding rock, leaving only the harder igneous core standing exposed above the plains. Several Native American tribes, including the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Kiowa, consider the tower sacred, and it appears in tribal origin stories long before European settlers ever laid eyes on it. More recently, the tower became a fixture of American pop culture after Steven Spielberg used it as the climactic backdrop for Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 1977, which is a fitting bit of trivia for a rock formation that already looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. The tower's surface is marked by roughly disciplined columns, most with 4 to 7 sides, which makes it a genuinely popular destination for rock climbers, who've been scaling its sheer walls since the first recorded ascent in 1893, when 2 local ranchers built a wooden ladder up one of the cracks. Because several tribes still hold ceremonies at the base of the tower, particularly during the month of June, the National Park Service asks climbers to voluntarily avoid the rock that month out of respect, a compromise that most climbing groups have chosen to honor even though it isn't legally required. Number 15. Mono Lake, California. Mono Lake sits on the eastern edge of the Sierra Nevada in California, and its shoreline is lined with towering, twisted spires of a porous limestone called tufa, some standing well over 30 feet tall. These formations don't form above water. They grow underwater, when calcium-rich freshwater springs bubble up from the lake bottom and react with the lake's naturally alkaline, carbonate-rich water, precipitating limestone around the spring openings. The only reason so many tufa towers are visible above the surface today is because of a decades-long water dispute. Starting in 1941, the city of Los Angeles began diverting water from the streams that fed Mono Lake, and the lake's water level dropped by roughly 45 vertical feet over the following 4 decades, exposing tufa formations that had spent thousands of years growing quietly underwater. A legal battle led by local environmentalists eventually forced Los Angeles to scale back its diversions in the 1990s, and the lake has been slowly recovering ever since. Mono Lake is also about 2.5 times saltier than the ocean, with no fish able to survive in it. But that hasn't stopped it from supporting an enormous ecosystem of brine shrimp and alkali flies, which in turn feed millions of migratory birds every year. It's a genuinely alien-looking lake that happens to be one of the most important bird habitats on the entire West Coast. 2 small volcanic islands sit inside the lake itself, Pauha and Nagit, both formed by relatively recent volcanic activity and both closed to the public for part of the year to protect nesting seabird colonies. The lake is thought to be at least 760,000 years old, making it one of the oldest lakes in North America, and its unusual chemistry has made it a genuine focus of astrobiology research, since scientists study Mono Lake's extreme, alkaline conditions as a stand-in for the kinds of environments life might have to survive in on other worlds. Number 14. Meteor Crater, Arizona. About 40 miles east of Flagstaff, a nearly perfect bowl-shaped hole punches almost a mile wide into the flat Arizona desert, dropping more than 550 feet deep. Meteor Crater, also known as Barringer Crater, was formed roughly 50,000 years ago when an iron-nickel meteorite, somewhere between 100 and 170 feet across, slammed into the Colorado Plateau at tens of thousands of miles an hour, releasing an explosion estimated at somewhere between 15 and 40 megatons. For decades after its discovery in the 1890s, most geologists insisted the crater had to be volcanic, since a genuine impact crater on Earth's surface seemed scientifically implausible at the time. A mining engineer named Daniel Barringer spent 27 years trying to prove otherwise, convinced the meteorite itself was buried somewhere underneath, worth a fortune in iron ore. He never found it, since most of the meteorite had vaporized on impact, but decades later, in 1960, geologist Eugene Shoemaker finally confirmed the crater's impact origin using mineral evidence that could only form under the extreme pressure of a hypervelocity collision. That confirmation turned the site into something genuinely useful for the space program. Between 1963 and 1970, NASA sent Apollo astronauts to train at Meteor Crater specifically because its terrain closely resembled what they'd encounter on the lunar surface, meaning some of the first humans to walk on the moon literally rehearsed the experience in an Arizona meteor crater first. Number 13. Goblin Valley State Park, Utah. Goblin Valley sits in a remote stretch of Utah desert, packed with thousands of squat, mushroom-shaped rock formations locally called goblins, ranging from a couple feet tall to well over 10. The valley was reportedly first noticed by cowboys chasing lost cattle, and later explored more thoroughly in the late 1920s by a man named Arthur Chaffin, who was so struck by the eerie landscape that he originally named it Mushroom Valley. The goblins are made of Entrada sandstone, deposited roughly 170 million years ago, when the entire region was a muddy tidal flat at the edge of an ancient inland sea. That sandstone contains layers of varying hardness, and as wind, rain, and ice slowly eroded the softer material away, the harder caprock protected small pillars of stone beneath it, gradually carving out the round, bulbous shapes visitors see today. The same erosion is still actively working, meaning some goblins currently standing will eventually collapse entirely on their own. Utah made the site a state park in 1964 specifically to protect it, a decision that turned out to be a good one after a 2013 incident in which a group of men filmed themselves deliberately toppling one of the ancient formations, an act that turned out to be a felony under Utah law. Most of the goblins, thankfully, remain exactly where millions of years of erosion left them. Number 12. Trona Pinnacles, California. Rising out of a dry lake bed in California's Mojave Desert, the Trona Pinnacles are a field of more than 500 towering spires, some reaching as high as 140 feet, made almost entirely of porous calcium carbonate called tufa. Unlike most rock formations, these pinnacles didn't form in open air. They grew entirely underwater, between roughly 10,000 and 100,000 years ago, when Searles Lake was a genuine, deep body of water connected to a chain of Pleistocene-era lakes stretching all the way from Owens Valley down to Death Valley. Hot springs rich in calcium bubbled up from beneath the ancient lake bed, and when that calcium-laden water mixed with the lake's naturally alkaline chemistry, it triggered a reaction that deposited solid calcium carbonate, slowly building spires around each underwater spring vent. As the surrounding lake eventually dried up over thousands of years, the towers were left standing fully exposed above the desert floor, looking almost nothing like anything else nearby. The site's stark, otherworldly appearance has made it an enormously popular filming location for decades, standing in for alien and post-apocalyptic landscapes in movies including Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes, and Lost in Space. It earned formal recognition as a National Natural Landmark in 1968, protecting one of the best examples of tufa tower formation found anywhere in North America. Number 11. Craters of the Moon National Monument, Idaho. Craters of the Moon covers roughly 750,000 acres of south-central Idaho with black, jagged lava fields, cinder cones, and volcanic craters. Terrain so barren and alien-looking that its name isn't just a marketing gimmick. The landscape formed through a series of 8 major volcanic eruptions along the Great Rift, a 52-mile-long crack in the Earth's crust, spanning roughly 15,000 years, with the most recent eruptions occurring only around 2,000 years ago, which in geological terms is essentially yesterday. The lava here didn't erupt as a single dramatic explosion. Instead, it flowed out in relatively gentle basaltic eruptions, similar to the kind still seen in Hawaii today, spreading across the landscape and hardening into vast fields of dark, twisted rock. That process left behind lava tubes, cinder cones, and spatter cones, along with deep cracks and caves that stay unusually cold year-round, some cold enough to hold ice well into summer. The connection to actual space exploration isn't just a coincidence either. NASA sent Apollo astronauts here in the 1960s, alongside their trip to Meteor Crater, to study volcanic geology and collect field samples before their lunar missions, treating the site as one of the closest available substitutes for what they expected the moon's surface to look like. Number 10. Great Sand Dunes National Park, Colorado. Great Sand Dunes National Park is home to the tallest sand dunes in North America, some rising more than 750 feet above the surrounding valley floor, which is a genuinely bizarre thing to encounter in landlocked, mountainous Colorado. The dunes sit at the base of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in the San Luis Valley, hundreds of miles from any ocean. The sand didn't arrive by accident. Over tens of thousands of years, wind blowing across the flat valley floor picked up sand and sediment left behind by ancient lakes and carried it toward the mountains, where the terrain funnels the wind into a natural dead end. Unable to carry the sand any further, the wind dropped it at the base of the peaks, slowly building the dune field taller and taller over an estimated 440,000 years. What makes the park even stranger is the sheer range of ecosystems packed into one place. Visitors can walk from towering desert dunes into an alpine forest and up into snow-capped mountain peaks over 13,000 feet high, all within the boundaries of a single national park. A creek that runs along the base of the dunes even produces a natural, rhythmic wave effect during peak snowmelt season, caused by sand slumping in and out of the streambed in pulses, something hydrologists have only documented in a handful of places worldwide. Number 9. Antelope Canyon, Arizona. Antelope Canyon, on Navajo land near Page, Arizona, is a slot canyon so narrow and deeply carved that sunlight only reaches the canyon floor in scattered beams, illuminating swirling, wave-like walls of sandstone in shades of orange, pink, and purple. The canyon is split into two publicly accessible sections, Upper and Lower Antelope Canyon, both formed the same violent way: flash flooding. Over thousands of years, monsoon rains sent fast-moving water rushing through cracks in the Navajo sandstone, and that water, carrying sand and grit, acted almost like liquid sandpaper, slowly carving and smoothing the canyon walls into the sweeping, sculptural curves visible today. The same flooding that created the canyon still occurs, and it remains genuinely dangerous, most infamously in August 1997, when a flash flood swept through Lower Antelope Canyon and killed 11 tourists who had entered without adequate warning of the incoming storm. Because the canyon sits on Navajo Nation land, access today is only permitted through guided tours led by Navajo operators, both for safety and to protect a site considered sacred by the Navajo people. Photographers regularly travel from around the world specifically to capture the canyon's shifting light beams, which only appear for a brief window around midday when the sun sits high enough to reach directly down through the narrow crack in the rock. Number 8. Bisti/De-Na-Zin Wilderness, New Mexico. The Bisti/De-Na-Zin Wilderness spans roughly 45,000 acres of Badlands in northwestern New Mexico, and it's home to some of the strangest natural rock formations found anywhere in the country, with nicknames like the Alien Egg Hatchery, Cracked Eggs, and King of Wings. There are no marked trails through the wilderness, and visitors are largely left to navigate on their own through a maze of hoodoos, spires, and petrified wood scattered across an eroded, moon-like landscape. The terrain here was once a swampy river delta at the edge of an ancient inland sea, roughly 70 million years ago, home to dinosaurs, early mammals, and dense vegetation. As that ecosystem was buried and compressed over millions of years into layers of sandstone, shale, and coal, later erosion slowly stripped the softer rock away, exposing hoodoos capped with harder, more resistant stone that protected the softer pillars underneath from wearing away completely. Paleontologists have pulled genuinely significant fossils out of the Bisti Badlands, including a new species of tyrannosaur discovered in 1998 and nicknamed the Bisti Beast, along with a Pentaceratops skeleton unearthed more recently in 2015. It's one of the rare places in the country where you can wander through genuinely alien-looking scenery while literally standing on top of the fossilized remains of the age of dinosaurs. Number 7. White Sands National Park, New Mexico. White Sands National Park protects the largest gypsum dune field on the planet, nearly 275 square miles of brilliant white sand dunes rippling across the floor of the Tularosa Basin in southern New Mexico. Unlike most desert sand, which is typically made of quartz, these dunes are almost entirely composed of gypsum, a soft mineral that's usually dissolved by rainwater long before it ever has the chance to pile up into dunes anywhere else in the world. The Tularosa Basin is a rare exception because it's a closed drainage system, meaning water that flows into the basin has nowhere else to go. Gypsum washed down from the surrounding mountains collects in a shallow lake bed at the basin's center, and as that water evaporates in the desert heat, it leaves behind gypsum crystals, which wind, then breaks down and sculpts into the smooth, blindingly white dunes covering the park today. The surrounding region has a history that stretches from ancient Ice Age megafauna, whose fossilized footprints have been found preserved in the old lakebed sediment, all the way up to the modern nuclear age, since the park sits directly adjacent to the White Sands Missile Range, where the world's first atomic bomb was detonated in July 1945. It's a landscape that looks completely untouched by human history, sitting right next to one of the most consequential sites in it. Number 6. Fly Geyser, Nevada. Fly Geyser rises out of Nevada's Black Rock Desert in a riot of red, green, and orange color, constantly spraying jets of hot water several feet into the air from a growing mound of mineral deposits. Despite its name, it's not technically a natural geyser at all. It's an accident, created in 1964 when a geothermal energy company drilled a test well on the property and either failed to cap it properly or left it open entirely, allowing pressurized, mineral-rich hot water to blast uncontrolled out of the ground. Once the water started flowing, it never really stopped. Over the following decades, dissolved calcium carbonate in the water gradually built up into a growing travertine mound. Now several feet tall and still expanding by a few inches every year, the vivid red and green coloring comes entirely from thermophilic algae, heat-loving organisms thriving in the warm, mineral-rich runoff, painting the whole formation in colors that look almost too vivid to be real. Fly Geyser sits on private land known as Fly Ranch, purchased by the Burning Man Project in 2016, and access remains tightly restricted to scheduled guided tours run by a local conservation group. It's arguably the most photographed geological feature in Nevada that most visitors will never actually get to see up close. A genuinely bizarre, man-made accident that ended up looking more alien than anything nature built on purpose nearby. Number 5. Badlands National Park, South Dakota. Badlands National Park stretches across nearly 250,000 acres of southwestern South Dakota, filled with jagged buttes, deep canyons, and striped layered rock formations in shades of yellow, tan, purple, and red. The Lakota people originally called this terrain Makosika, meaning land bad, and early French trappers echoed the same sentiment, describing it as bad lands to travel through, a name that stuck permanently to the landscape. The park's dramatic striped layers come from tens of millions of years of alternating sediment deposits, laid down when the region sat at the edge of an ancient inland sea and, later, a river floodplain. Wind and water have been eroding those layers away for roughly 500,000 years, at a rate fast enough, by geological standards, that park officials estimate the entire formation will erode completely away within another 500,000 years, a genuinely rare case of a landscape with a rough expiration date. That same erosion has made Badlands one of the richest fossil beds in the world, regularly exposing the remains of ancient rhinoceroses, saber-toothed cats, and three-toed horses that once roamed the region tens of millions of years ago. Paleontologists still actively excavate new fossils there today, meaning the same erosion carving the park's alien-looking terrain keeps uncovering fresh pieces of prehistoric Earth along with it. Number 4. The Wave, Arizona, and Utah. The Wave sits inside the Coyote Buttes North area of the Vermilion Cliffs Wilderness, straddling the Arizona-Utah border, and it's widely considered one of the most visually surreal rock formations anywhere on the planet. Its sweeping, undulating bands of red, orange, and yellow sandstone genuinely look like frozen ocean waves, an illusion created by roughly 190 million years of wind and water erosion carving through ancient cross-bedded sand dunes that hardened into Navajo sandstone during the Jurassic period. Because the formation is so fragile and so overwhelmingly popular, the Bureau of Land Management strictly limits access to just 64 visitors a day, distributed almost entirely through a competitive online lottery. In recent years, the odds have been genuinely brutal, with some reports showing well over 300,000 people applying annually for a shot at fewer than 20,000 available daily permits, putting the success rate somewhere around 3%. There's no marked trail leading to the Wave either. Permit holders receive a printed map with GPS coordinates and photo landmarks, and have to navigate roughly 3 miles across open desert on their own, with rangers actively patrolling to check permits and issue steep fines to anyone caught entering without one. It's a landscape so strange and so tightly protected that simply getting permission to see it in person has become almost as difficult as the hike itself. Number 3. Racetrack Playa, Death Valley, California. Racetrack. Playa is a dry lakebed tucked into a remote corner of Death Valley National Park, and scattered across its cracked, flat surface are hundreds of rocks, some weighing up to 700 pounds, that appear to have dragged themselves across the ground entirely on their own, leaving long, curving trails carved into the mud behind them. People had documented the moving rocks since at least the 1940s, but for decades, nobody had ever actually witnessed one in motion. Theories ranged from hurricane-force winds to dust devils to, inevitably, more far-fetched ideas involving magnetic fields. The real answer, confirmed by scientists in 2014 after years of patient observation using GPS-tagged rocks, turned out to be a genuinely rare combination of weather conditions. During cold winter nights, shallow rainwater pooling on the playa freezes into thin sheets of ice, and as that ice begins melting and cracking apart under the morning sun, light desert winds push the floating ice panels forward, gently shoving the rocks embedded in them across the soft, slick mud below. Researcher Richard Norris, who led the team that finally caught the phenomenon on camera in December 2013, described the moment as pure luck, since they'd expected to wait 5 or 10 years without seeing anything move at all. The rocks typically only move once every 2 or 3 years, and even then, at speeds of just a few feet per minute, meaning the eerie trails left behind are usually the only evidence anyone ever sees. Number 2, Bonneville Salt Flats, Utah. The Bonneville Salt Flats stretch across roughly 30,000 acres of blindingly white, dead flat terrain in northwestern Utah, a landscape so level that the curvature of the earth itself becomes visible looking across it. The flats are the remains of ancient Lake Bonneville, a massive Ice Age lake that once covered much of what's now western Utah, before drying up and leaving behind a thick crust of salt, gypsum, and potassium chloride. That perfectly flat, hard-packed surface turned out to be ideal for one very specific, very loud purpose: driving as fast as physically possible. Racing on the flats dates back to 1912, and it became the world's premier venue for land speed records after Sir Malcolm Campbell broke 300 miles per hour there in 1935. Since then, the record has been broken there at least 18 times, including Craig Breedlove's 600.6 mile per hour run in 1965, and more recent runs pushing well past 450 miles per hour. The salt crust itself isn't as stable as it once was. Decades of nearby potash mining and changing water patterns have thinned the historic salt layer from several feet down to just a few inches in some areas, shrinking the usable race course considerably and prompting an ongoing effort by racing organizations to petition for restoration of the flats before more of Utah's strangest natural racetrack disappears for good. Number 1, Grand Prismatic Spring, Yellowstone, Wyoming. No list like this one ends anywhere else. Grand Prismatic Spring, sitting in Yellowstone's Midway Geyser Basin, is the largest hot spring in the United States and the third largest in the entire world, stretching roughly 370 feet across and plunging more than 120 feet deep, deeper than a 10-story building. Its deep blue center, surrounded by concentric rings of vivid orange, yellow, and green, makes it look less like a body of water and more like something beamed in from another world entirely. The colors aren't dye or mineral staining. They're living organisms. The spring's scalding center, reaching temperatures around 189 degrees Fahrenheit, is too hot for almost anything to survive, letting the water's natural, pure blue color show through unobstructed. As the water flows outward and gradually cools, different species of heat-loving bacteria called thermophiles take over, each thriving at its own specific temperature range and producing a distinct band of color, from the yellows and oranges near the middle to the darker greens and browns along the cooler outer edges. The spring was first formally documented in 1871 by the Hayden Expedition, the first federally funded survey of the region, and its leader, Ferdinand Hayden, wrote afterward that nothing conceived by human art could match the vividness of the prismatic springs, adding that simply seeing them felt like a privilege. More than 150 years later, that description still holds up. A genuinely alien-looking pool of scalding water sitting quietly in the middle of Wyoming, kept alive and colorful by microorganisms that have been thriving there since long before anyone thought to write it down. 17 places carved by lava, ice, wind, meteorites, and microorganisms, and every single one of them proves you don't need to leave the planet to feel like you already have. From a boiling rainbow spring to a field of rocks that quietly move on their own, the strangest terrain in the solar system might already be a few hours' drive away. If you enjoyed this one, hit like, subscribe for more of these, and let me know in the comments which of these you'd want to see in person first. See you in the next video.